Welcome back to Go and Preach. We are talking about witnessing to people of another culture. I had the privilege of living in the continent of Africa for 5 years. I lived in a couple different countries, but I traveled quite a bit too. And what I realized there, after being there for a while, was that we see the world differently in America than they do in another culture. And so I learned pretty quickly that we, as Americans, we are very ethnocentric. We think that we are the best. We think that we know the truth, and our way of seeing the truth is the best. Specifically, I saw this, in the area of democracy. We have this idea that democracy is almost like the gospel, but in reality, it's not. And I just want to encourage you, if you ever come across somebody of another culture, and I'll even throw in there another worldview, because we are now living in the United States of America where even the people from our own culture really are from another culture because they have a different worldview than we do, generally speaking. And I just want to encourage you that when we witness to somebody of a completely different worldview, a completely different culture, it is not our responsibility to immediately beat them over the head and point out every area where they are wrong or where everything about their culture is wrong. The Apostle Paul gives us a very good example of how we can minister to unbelievers of another worldview or even from other religions. And this happened in Acts chapter 17. Now, Paul had been traveling extensively, and at one point he needed to leave one area and go, and he went alone to Athens. He left Thessalonica, and he came to Athens. And while he's in Athens, he was by himself. He left his ministry party in the other city. And while he's there, it says that he was provoked in his spirit because he saw that the Greeks had been given over to thousands of gods, given over to idols. This is in Acts chapter 17 and verse 16. He says, "While Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols." And because the Spirit had provoked him, and I've experienced this before, being in an ungodly place, surrounded by people, it was a football game, I felt provoked in my spirit that I needed to preach the gospel. Now it's interesting that he didn't just start yelling and telling them, your culture is wrong, all your gods are wrong, you guys are horrible and you're going to hell. He didn't do that. But what he did do is very important, and I think we should all take note of it. What he did was he started on common ground. He started talking about one of their gods that they had labeled the unknown God, and he used that as a springboard to preach about the real Creator. Now you will find in just about every culture there is some kind of spiritual common ground, whether it's from another religion or just something about their culture. You can use it as a way to connect with the culture, connect with the people, and also use it as a springboard for the gospel. Now, one way that I did this when I was in Lesotho is I actually learned as much as I could about their culture. Now, I didn't say the religion, I said the culture. I learned as much as I could about the culture. I learned as much about the language as I could. I would greet people in their language. I would say, Dumela ntate, upela juan, kepela hantle. And I would, Labito laga ke Justin Stewart, Ketswa America. I would learn how to speak different things from their language. And it created a connection. It created a mutual common ground that we had. And I would encourage you, take some time to have a basic understanding of the mindset, the sensitivities and the prejudices and the religious integration of their culture. Many cultures, different from the United States, that religion is actually very integrated into the culture, into the way that they believe, the way they act, the way they go about their daily lives. For example, you go to the Chinese restaurant, you look up above the door, you'll see a little idol with incense burning. You ever noticed that before? Well, it's part of the Chinese, Japanese, and many Asian cultures. It's integrated into this society. It's a little sacrifice to their gods. Okay? Now in Africa, it's the same way. So I encourage you, start on some common ground. Most religions have some common belief, whether it's about the creation of the world. That often is a good place to start. You know what? In your culture, you believe that this benevolent being created the world out of existence. It is this God that I come preaching to you. You see, you connect with them on something you both believe, and then from there you add. You build on that and say, and this God had a son and his name was Jesus. However you want to do it. But I want to give you one really good example. When I was in Lesotho, I worked with another man, a colleague of mine, and we used to do a lot of funeral preaching. I know that sounds maybe a little bit morbid, but in Africa there's a lot of death. HIV, AIDS, and other things are just tearing the place apart. Almost weekly, there's somebody that you know who had somebody die either in their family or somebody that they know, and they have to go to the funeral. So being the white guy preacher from America, we often got asked to preach at funerals of people we didn't even know. So one time, my colleague was the preacher at a funeral, and in their culture, they have this strange custom. They would take a lamb skin. They'd kill a lamb, and they take the skin off the lamb, and they would use it to cover the casket, the coffin of the deceased. Now, my friend was very curious about this, and he asked them, why do you do this? And we got two different answers, which also is not uncommon in Africa, to get more than one answer for the same question. The first reasoning that we received was to keep the soul warm and comfortable in the afterlife. And the second one was a little more disturbing. They put a lamb skin over the coffin to keep the spirit of the deceased person from coming back to haunt the living relatives. Now, very clearly, as a believer, I don't believe that any of those two things are real, okay? And I could have come there, or my friend could have got up there and just tore apart. That's not biblical, that's horrible. But instead of doing that, he didn't bash them for being ridiculous, but what he did was he used that custom in his funeral sermon as common ground. He pointed out to them that you truly believe in the afterlife. You believe that souls will continue to live even after they die. And with this as the common ground, he pointed them to the everlasting life that can be found through Jesus Christ, and a place called heaven where everyone is comfortable and have no desire to come back. You see, he started on common ground from a custom that they had, and instead of tearing it apart, he used it to preach Christ. And that's exactly what Paul did. And I would encourage you, when you meet people of other worldviews and other cultures, be careful about wounding them before you have connected with them, because that will damage the future relationship. If you wound them, or many American missionaries, we do this all the time, and we're not even aware of it, because I'm going to offend somebody out there, but because we are very arrogant. As a country, we are very arrogant. We're very proud. And I believe it's because we were told since the time we were little kids that we have the greatest country in the world and nobody's as good as us. Nonetheless, we go as missionaries to these other countries, and we often want to bring our ways and our customs and our culture with us. And sometimes as the receiving country, the Africans or wherever it is that you go, they have a hard time separating, okay, this is the gospel, this is the truth, this is American culture, this is not necessarily the truth, this is their way of worship, this is their way of music, that's not necessarily truth. And see, we come and we bring it all together in a big package and we present it, and we wonder why, oftentimes, our ways and our methods are not adopted. Or, even worse than that is, it's accepted as long as the missionary is present. But as soon as the missionary leaves the field, the work crumbles and falls apart because they did not buy into the thing that you were bringing because it wasn't theirs. They never owned it. It was an American import. Sorry if I'm getting off topic a little bit, but it's the same idea. We want to start on common ground and then build on that and preach Christ to them. So that is a tip to witnessing to somebody of a different worldview. And I believe it also applies to people in our country, in our culture, who have not been raised up with a Christian worldview. We find some common ground and use it to preach Christ. Amen. God bless you. I'll see you next time here on Go and Preach. Don't forget to go and vote.